Hello and welcome to episode 98 of Adult Music, the podcast with music for the mature mind. This is your co-host Russ over here, and over there is...
Yeah, this is your co-host Mike over here with the classical listings for this week.
Classical side over there.
I have to say 98 was a good year.
Yeah, it was a good year. And 2023 is shaping up to be a good year. Last week...
Already, yeah.
Yeah, last week we got some nice response to the episode by La Serenissima.
Yeah, La Serenissima wrote to us. Actually, they're a rather large ensemble, and I think a lot of them got involved. We had a lot of messages from them, yeah. All of them on Facebook, by the way, so everybody, if you go to our Facebook site, you can read them all. They did not write to our Gmail, which is kind of interesting. Or did they? Because I didn't check.
No, I think they were
right back to them
just on Facebook.
It was on Facebook. Yeah, I got to put more posts up there. That really paid off. It turned out that I put up the Tabia Debus recorder. One of them I put up wasn't with La Serenissima. She was with someone else. Yeah. And I mislabeled them, but I did fix it. So I don't know. But I left it up. I thought it was a good performance.
And we also got some nice feedback from the jazz piano debut, the Trío recording last week. Ilya Vandermeulen Trío, Dutch piano player, with his release Time Ticking. If you haven't heard that, check that out. It's a really great recording. Anyway, he was really happy with what we had to say about the album. And so I got in touch finding out how we could get a copy of it. And it's only going to be released on vinyl.
Yeah, so you vinyl heads will be happy about that. But I'm not, because I'm a CD guy.
Yeah, Mike and I are digital heads. Mike's really into CDs. I like CDs, but I also do streaming, and everything's on my music server, and I got out of the vinyl game. I still have some gear back in the U.S. and some records, but it's not the way forward for me.
I'll listen to vinyl, but I'm not going to collect it. I'm just not. It takes up a lot of room. I'm digital all the way.
Anyway, so
absolutely, I like the clean sound of digital.
And I've got another great debut recording tonight coming up in the jazz section from another country, and so I can't wait to talk about that. Let's see what else. Well, we did have a death this week, a big music name, not in classical or jazz, but we shouldn't mention it, and I'm sure everyone knows about it. Yeah,
that would be Jeff Beck, the guitarist,
right? Yeah.
The rock guitarist.
Yeah, rock guitarist, huge figure in rock music.
Yeah, not only that, but you did mention he did record Goodbye Pork Pie Hat, right?
Yeah, Ming's tunes.
He also recorded, this is interesting, I don't know if he recorded it, but he did perform Nessun Dorma by Puccini. So I guess he could count him as both classical and jazz.
I guess, to a certain extent.
He was very wide-ranging in his musical tastes, and I'm happy to hear that. He would have been a great guest on the show, actually. We could have talked music with him.
Oh, well, we missed our chance. Anyway, rest in peace, the great Jeff Beck. So here at Adult Music, every week we bring you 6 recent recordings, usually in classical and jazz categories, and we discuss them and give you all the information. And just to remind everyone, you're going to get all that information in the episode description with links to Spotify and Apple Music for all the music we're going to talk about. Also, at the top of the description, you can get a link to the full episode playlist. That's all the music in one place on Deezer, our favorite CD quality streaming platform from France. And you can also listen to the podcast there if you want to get all the music and the podcast in the same place. And if you don't see the full description or list on whatever app you're listening to us on, you can always come over to our host site. That's Podbean, PODBEAN.com. Everything's easy to follow, all the links and descriptions there. Now, if you enjoy the podcast, please follow or subscribe wherever you listen to us. Tell a friend. Helps us get new listeners. And if you write a ranking or write a review of the podcast wherever you listen to us, that helps us get listed in the recommendations in the music categories, and then we get more listeners that way. And that makes us happy too. You can also come over and follow us on Facebook, see some interaction with the artists that we talk about during the week, get some extra info and new releases throughout the week. You can leave a message or comment there. And if you want to get in touch directly by email, we'd love to hear from you too with any comments or questions. Our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. We're also sharing audiences with a few other music-related podcasts we'd like you to check out. We've got Tom Gauker's podcast, Something Came from Baltimore. It's a jazz, blues, and R&B interview podcast. And we've got Famous Interviews and Neon Jazz from Joe Domino, who interviews artists, musicians, and writers. And we've got Same Difference, 2 Jazz Fans, 1 Jazz Standard, Johnny Valenzuela and Tony Habra take a look at several versions of the same jazz standard each week, and they play a little bit from each one and discuss the history and the different versions. So if you need some more podcasts during the week, please check those out. You'll find the links at the end of the description, and if you stick around to the end of the episode, you'll hear the little promos from each podcast as well.
This week we had a lot of downloads by single people who, this always kind of intrigues me. Like single people will download 20 podcasts or something like that, and they're all 2 hours long. I'm really amazed that people are gonna just go through them all and listen to them like that.
Yeah, I noticed that this week we would have the first downloads of the day. We would have a large number, but then a few number of individual listeners. We can get that kind of statistics from the feedback from Podbean. So I was happy. That means it's somebody new who's downloading a lot. And yeah, that's cool. So any new listeners, welcome.
One of the nice things about Podbean too, is you can kind of see they'll show you maps of your sort of distribution, and like say, if we can see which states people are listening to us in the United States, which is really cool. And in some other countries too, but not Japan. They don't give you a map of Japan and show you where people are listening to, because Japan is our second largest audience. The United States is by far the largest, which is fantastic. We love our American audience, of course. They're our home, our paisan, I guess, if you want to say it that way. But the Japan, they don't give you a Japan map, which is too bad. So I'd like to see where those people are. Are they all like in Kansai? Are they in Tokyo? Or
it would be nice to know.
I remember when I was writing for the Kansai Time Out, I did the classical music coming events, and we had a lot of the readers that would write back were from the consulate in Osaka. They would sort of read the column. And I guess they were classical music heads there, at least one of them. And I'm just kind of wondering if it's them who's listening to us. If you are, send us a line. We'd like to know that you're listening. Okay, any listeners in Japan? We'd like to know where you're located.
Nice. And I guess because of Jelle Vandermeulen effect, we had a whole lot of Netherlands downloads for the first time this week.
That's cool. I
hope some of you stay on and become regular listeners. That would be cool as well.
All right. So are we ready to go off into this is the third episode of the year, I guess.
I think we're going way back in time to start this one out too, aren't we?
Yeah, we are going back to the Renaissance era. So more than 400 years ago. Now, I chose this one because one of Russ's albums of the year last year was a record about Florence, the Florentine Renaissance. Right. So I happen to have this one too, and this is I like this one a lot better than the one actually Russ picked actually, but I'll get into that when we do it. I'll tell you why in a moment. But although I like that one too a lot. Okay, this one is called The Splendour of Florence with a Burgundian Resonance. Burgundy meaning, I guess, France and Flanders. I guess those people would be Flemish. All these tunes are in French. This is by Gothic Voices, and it's on the Linn label, which is part of the Out There Music group. Now, first of all, Florence. I spent a lot of time in Florence. I'm always very interested in what was going on there, especially musically. Florence, as people may know, any of you music historians out there, is the birthplace of opera, and the building where opera was actually created in is still there. You can actually go by it. It's pretty amazing. Yeah. But there was all sorts of church music and just Renaissance type music in the Renaissance, Florence being the birthplace of the Renaissance, or thought of it. Gothic Voices, I remember they were formed in 1980 and they're still going here in 2023. That's amazing. Yeah. Now, if you think about that, this is a Renaissance era medieval music ensemble. And in 1980, that would have meant they were at the vanguard of this sort of research, because research into pre-Baroque music really started taking off in the 1980s. It was already happening in the 1970s, but it really became like a thing unto itself, really starting in the 1980s. Now, Gothic Voices, those of you who may be fans of a Hildegard of Bingen, they released what I think is the best ever still, a record of Hildegard of Bingen's music called A Feather on the Breath of God. And Emma Kirkby was on that. And it was released in 1985, and it was on Hyperion Records. I have a copy of it, of course. And I still listen to it from time to time. It's really beautiful. It's one of those essential classical recordings that everybody should have. So A Feather on the Breath of God on Hyperion Records by Gothic Voices. Check that out. It's really old. They've moved on now. They've released amazing albums of Renaissance and medieval music all the way through the years. And they even had a really cool Christmas album in 2019 of medieval music that I really enjoyed as well. So this one, the theme is Florence, and Florence is said to have been the birthplace of the Renaissance, and it drew in the beginning many Franco-Flemish composers, which is why there's so much French music on this album. Italian composers would really take over in the Baroque. They created the Baroque, really. But in this era, the Renaissance church music, that would have been like people like Josquin, like Franco-Flemish composers. And in this case, the main mover on this album is going to be Guillaume Dufay. His music features quite a bit. Their music was very popular amongst the wealthy and cultured, which would have been pretty much all of Florence at the time. Anyway, let's get into this album. The music is really a celebration of Florence itself, and it's music that was found in texts from the time. A lot of it has to do with church music, and it centers around the great Santa Maria del Fiore Duomo in Florence, the very famous Brunelleschi dome. Still a model for to this day, one of the most beautiful buildings ever created. And you can go to Florence and see it today. It's a really wonderful thing. Anyway, so this music had been heard around Florence at in some of the cultured halls and in the church as well. We get everything here. We start out with an anonymous chant called Terribilis est locus iste. This is very brief. It's only 48 seconds. It's a single male-voiced chant. It's sung by tenor Stephen Harold. Gothic voices, by the way, are 4 vocalists, and I'll name them as they come up. So Stephen Harold, tenor, is the first person we hear. It introduces the program. Terribilis est locus iste means awesome is this place. It doesn't mean, it means terrible in the sense of awesome, not really bad. Okay. It's an older meaning of the word. Terribilis. They still use that in French, like terrible could mean terrible, or could mean like just something awesome or overwhelming. Referring to Florence. We've lost that meaning in English. Terrible just means really bad now in English. Next, we get the man of the hour, Guillaume Dufay, Miranda's Pari Hayek Urbs. This is written in an older style, so we're kind of going back way into the past. The tenors are singing a cantus firmus, and it moves more slowly than the upper parts. It's also a little hard to hear because it's in the middle, but it's kind of guiding the rest of the voices. Whenever you hear a cantus firmus, it's really the voice that all the other voices are kind of orbiting around, let's say, or it's kind of controlling them, let's say. This polyphonic work is accompanied by a light harp of the era played by Andrew Lawrence King, and he features very heavily on this album. He's the only instrumentalist on the album. Yeah. Everyone else is a vocalist. Yeah, so he gets a lot of time, and I really like his playing a lot. I'm always happy to see him on albums, and this is no different. The vocals in this piece, and really throughout this whole album, are rather subdued sounding in a really appealing way. They're not really singing out. They're kind of like just singing, like they're in a chamber singing to a small audience that's really close by. So they don't sound really bright, but they focus on the words, and there's a more tempered tone to them. I really like the sound, and that really drew me to this album. That's why I like this album so much more than the Florentine Renaissance one from last year. Although I like that one too. I don't want to, say anything negative about that one. The voices aren't very plangent. Plangent means like kind of reverberant. They're not like kind of reverberating in the hall. To me, that adds to the appeal. It sounds more intimate. The harp also lacks that kind of plangency too. And the overall sound is something antiquated and appealing. Also, on this track, we hear the guest mezzo-soprano Elizabeth Paul along with the ensemble. This is, I think, the only track she's on, so I want to mention her, while we're hearing her. Okay, third track, Firminis Charon, Rose Plaisante Odorante. The opening is all taken by a harp with droning and boinging bass notes. Boing, boing, boing. It's kind of a characteristic sound of the era, I suppose. It's very pretty, and again, more atmospheric, with a quick decay on the harp. It doesn't really have much of a sustain. The vocals are by tenor Julian Podger, and it's a lovely track. Track 4, Johannes Åkergame Dung Oltre Amer. He wrote a whole, or Josquin wrote a whole mass on this song. But this is actually the song with its original lyrics. Catherine King, Stephen Harold, and Julian Podger are the vocal soloists, so that's soprano and 2 tenors. This has no accompaniment. The voices blend beautifully, yet in the counterpoint, they're all discernible. with King as the soprano standing out. The two men sing a lot of harmony in this, so they're really supporting her in a lot of ways. Beautiful performance, and I like the stately pacing of the rhythm too. There's some gorgeous harmonies in this texture as well. Track 5, Johannes Ockeghem again, Alma Redemptoris Mater. This is a later motet, so all voices have equal importance in their thematic imitative function and in their expressive content. We finally hear the bass baritone here, Simon Whiteley, on this track, finishing up the four-voice Gothic voices ensemble. This piece is sung out a bit more than those we've previously heard. Track 6, Loisette Compère, or they probably pronounce that differently. Loisette Compère, maybe. Renaissance French pronunciation is different than modern. Dictes moi toutes vos pensées. Tell me all your thoughts. Soprano, tenor, and bass. Again, the approach makes the lines very clear, and the men are often singing in a kind of parallel harmony, as the soprano is the most clearly heard. Track 7, Antoine Bouznois, Mon Sol et Sel Souvenir. Andrew Lawrence King is back on the harp in this one, with soprano, tenor, bass in the harmony. The harp gets a long solo in between the first and second verses, complete with the boinging bass notes. The middle verse is sung solo by Catherine King with her enjoyable, very even tone and really very intimate in her vibratoless way of performing this music. The third verse is back to three-part harmony. Track 8, Johannes Ockeghem, who is another major player on this album. Ultra Venus Estis Sans Fali, sung solo by Catherine King with Andrew Lawrence King accompanying on the harp. The rise and fall of the vocal line by itself is very appealing with its modal harmony. Catherine King brings a lovely, light, vibratoless tone to the piece, letting the room reverb create the atmosphere. I really enjoyed that. It's a nice track, and Andrew Lawrence King's playing is really beautiful on this as well. Track 9, Guillaume Dufay, Lamentatio Sanctae Matris Ecclesiae Constantinopolitane.
Ooh.
Oh, and there's more.
Yeah.
O tre pitul de tout espoir and omnes amici eus. So it's really two songs kind of sung together. This is written again in the older style with the tenor cantus firmus, and that moves more slowly again. A very slow, stately approach to the vocals is taken here. They sing in harmony for the beginning, then at around 40 seconds burst into polyphonic harmony. There's no harp accompaniment here. We're hearing the simple four-voice Gothic voices ensemble. The tenor voice singing the cantus firmus is singing an entirely different text than the other three vocals, by the way. So having a text handy would be helpful here if you want to follow what's being sung. Track 10 is an anonymous composition, Concupivit Rex, unaccompanied full ensemble singing in monophony with lots of melisma all the way through. So monophony means they're all singing the same note, more or less, maybe in octaves. But so lots of melisma. This is kind of the sort of chant type of thing you'd hear in church at the time. Track 11, Guillaume Dufay, Du tout m'histoire abandonne. This is a solo harp work for Andrew Lawrence King. It's gentle and a welcome brief respite from the texts. The work is quiet and still and is played in short phrases and is very brief at 1 minute and 30 seconds. Track 12, Hein van Gisegem, De tout bien plein. This has a soprano, tenor, and bass with harp accompaniment. The vocals begin in the middle range, more or less sticking to a harmonized monophonic texture, so all singing the same note. In the second verse, the soprano has the lead while the lower two voices provide accompanying harmony. That would be more like homophonic, but not too common at the time. The soprano sings the third verse solo, and then the accompanying voices return for verse 4. A lot of variety here to keep the ear interested. I really enjoyed that. The soprano is very much in the lead in this piece. Track 13, Guillaume Dufay de ma haute et bonne aventure. Here the tenor Stephen Harold has the solo with Andrew Lawrence King accompanying on the harp. This is the first time we've heard this combination on the album. King provides a heavier accompaniment than previously for Harold. I should say Lawrence King. His last name is Lawrence King, the harpist. Harold's voice is pleasant, but not quite thrown into as high relief as Catherine King's, because she really floats above the harp. She's really in a higher range. He blends into the harp sound, does Harold, more often. Not an unappealing quality, but I rather prefer the purity of Catherine King's solo with the harp. And in this song, the singer thanks love for what it has given him. Shouldn't we all do that? Yes, we should. Okay. Track 14. Alexander Agricola. He's an Italian, I think. Joie de Désir. The three male voices with harp accompaniment are heard. They sound pretty close in the harmony, stacked on one another. The vocal lines are fairly monophonic, though with staggered note values at times. The title is I Burn with Desire, and that pretty much sums up the text. I don't need to tell you what it says in order for you to imagine. Just get yourself the text here. You'll enjoy this. Track 15, an anonymous composition, Terribilis est locus iste. This is, again, awesome is this place, respond and verse. Now, a lot of times, awesome is this place is really, it's something that's said about heaven or some kind of place where God is present. It was also used in the Santa Maria del Fiore, the magnificent cathedral of Florence. So, and which is a pretty awesome place itself. One of the largest cathedrals in the world. I think it might be like third or fifth or something like that. And it's pretty spare inside. St. Peter's in Rome being the largest. Anyway, this piece has 4 voices and no harp. This proceeds like a plain chant with monophonic singing and melisma on the vowels. The middle verse is sung by one of the tenors. I don't know which one. There are 2 tenors. Track 16, Johannes Tinctoris, Virgo de Trono Digna. This is a later motet where all the voices have equal importance in their thematic, imitative function and in their expressive content, i.e., there's no cantus firmus here. There are 3 voices with no harp. This piece is begun without a pause after the previous track and is polyphonic, with the tones melting away from each other in a really beautiful way. This is a really beautiful polyphonic performance. A little unique, too. I really enjoyed this one. Track 16, so give that a listen. Oh, by the way, I want to just mention, the cantus firmus, this whole idea, you wonder, why did they have one voice in the middle controlling everything else? Well, it has to do with religion. The cantus firmus would often be singing a biblical text or a Gregorian chant line, and the other voices would decorate that. Eventually, we got away from that, but everything really starts with its religious purpose in Western music, and then eventually gets away from it. Anyway, so that's the older pieces will always have a cantus firmus in them. Antoine Bousmois is the composer on track 17, Terribile Fortuna, Ma Vostre Coeur, Mise en Oubli. This is a solo for the harp. It's light-toned with the bass boinging as the gentle Luke-like melody is played in the higher range. Lovely piece. I really like these Renaissance harp pieces. I could see being in a room, being fanned, having some harpist playing for me. I would really enjoy that, I think. I could have lived in this time, I think. As long as I wasn't a peasant. Anyway, there's always that. Everybody says, it would be great to be at your home. Yeah, if you were rich, it would be great to live any time if you were rich. But it would be awful if you were poor, really, at any time in the world, in world history. Anyway, track 18, Anonymous, Gloria Patri, Terribilis Est, Doxology, and Respond. The full ensemble without accompaniment is heard here. One of the tenors sings the plain chant of the first verse solo, and then the second verse is taken plain chant style by the whole vocal ensemble. And then finally, track 19, we get to the track of the that we've all been really waiting for, that the whole album's been leading up to. Guillaume Dufay's Nuper Rosarum Flores. This piece was composed for the consecration of Florence's Duomo in 1436. Ooh. It has isorhythmic tenor parts. Now that's very old. Isorhythmic came before the whole idea of cantus firmus and things like this. Isorhythm was you'd set this rhythm of, say, 16 like intervals of beats or even more than a person could hear. And that would like set the structure for the entire piece. That isorhythm had to keep repeating throughout the entire piece. If you want to hear something amazing, you should listen to Guillaume de Machaut's Messe de Notre Dame. That's an isorhythmic mass. All of it is isorhythmic. That's not the case here. The tenor part only is isorhythmic. And so that's going to be a structuring line for this work. Just keep that in mind. You're not really going to hear it, but if you know it's there intellectually, you can kind of enjoy it a little more. This piece is generally in an older style. The baritone Stephen Charlesworth is added to the ensemble here, and Andrew Lawrence King is on the harp. The tenor and one of the baritone voices have a different text to sing than the rest of the ensemble. They're singing the words Terribile est locus iste, or awesome is this place. This is a continuing refrain throughout the album. The text remembers a gift to the cathedral from the Pope, and the muted chiming of the harp and the focus on the higher-end voices who sing without vibrato, of course, make for a chaste kind of sound. And we're at the end. I thought this was a lovely album from start to finish. I really enjoyed the restraint of the vocals throughout, which drew my ear more into the interweaving of the melodic lines and gave them a bit of room to stand out. Now, I've heard other Gothic Voices albums throughout the years, even more recent ones. This sounds different than all of those. I think Gothic Voices really does take a different approach on every album, depending on what they're singing. And they're all really remarkable, and I thought this one stood out as well. The album comes across as gentle overall. It makes one long for the days of Renaissance Florence. It certainly made me long for those days, having spent quite a bit of time there as I have in my life. The program is commendably varied in its vocal orchestrations to keep the ear interested, with different vocal textures presented from track to track. The sound of cultivated civilization is well captured here. Oh, how I miss it, because we don't have it anymore. Even here in Japan, they talk about the days when, like, for example, in the Gidon area of Kyoto, there would be, like, when you would talk to, like, a geisha or a maiko, there was a way to talk to them, and people who frequented those places knew how to do that. It was just this really high-level kind of cultivated conversation that nobody really does anymore. I don't even think the geisha know it anymore either. But, again, I think Europe went through this period as well, as did Japan, and probably a lot of other Asian countries as well. So different textures are presented from track to track. This is an album I really want to recommend to fans of polyphonic singing, and it's a bit out of the ordinary, and that's why I want to recommend it. It certainly drew my ear in. Not all of it is polyphonic, by the way. A lot of it is, we really have all three styles, polyphonic, monophonic, the singing of the same note by everybody, as in Gregorian chant, and homophonic, which is what a song is. You have a main melody, and then everything else is subordinate to that. This really might be the best album of Florentine music I've ever heard. I love the approach the Gothic Voices took, and I love the sound of the album in general. So I would say highly recommended.
Yeah, I'm happy you picked this one. I enjoyed this a lot because I like Renaissance vocal music. I find it relaxing, but also interesting and compelling for the little quirkiness that comes out in especially the harmonies. As you said, you've got a variety of approaches in the composition using the voices here, so that's interesting. You'll have a lot of
good programming. Yeah,
sort of a little bit of polyphonic, then just sort of some with like parallel movements, and then there's a few numbers like that, track 16 you mentioned, and also track 12 that actually have a kind of built around cadences, but they're pre-Baroque kind of cadences, so they don't always go and resolve the way your ear expects them to in the
always
modern
interesting
days.
Yeah,
and there's little quirky sort of modulations sometimes and weird shifts in and out of major to minor. Not a lot of that, but just a little bit to keep
I think a lot of it's modal.
Up.
There's a lot of modes in this on this album. Yeah.
So you have those interesting surprises that you will be sort of waken up by from your general relaxed sort of state from just the beauty of the voices. And as you mentioned, this is not a reverby kind of cathedral recording. It's rather up close, soft, and intimate, and you can really enjoy the blend of the voices. And yeah, it's just really good listening, especially for me in the morning time. I like to listen to something like this, and I enjoyed it a lot. I don't know. I'd have to go back and listen to that one from last year again. But as you said, this may actually be better just for the richness of the material that it has. So if you like this kind of period of music, I think you're going to enjoy this one.
Yeah, nothing wrong with the one that we recommended last year. That's for sure. All right, now our next album, I spent most of the week working on what I was going to say about this, because this was really kind of hard to sort of break down. This is the Icelandic pianist Víkingur Ólafsson's new album From Afar, and it's on the Deutsche Grammophon label. All right, now it's 2 albums. It's 2 CDs. Now, if you're going to listen to it in streaming, it separates the program into 2 CDs, actually, or it should anyway, so you know what you're listening to. You hear the same program twice. CD 1 is the grand piano, so it's pretty much what we'd hear in a concert hall. And CD 2 is on an upright piano, so something you'd have in your home. It's a little more intimate and with a lot less sustain. and less brightness as well.
A lot of other sounds too.
And a lot of other sounds too. Yeah, there was some odd sounds that he did on this. There's so much to say about this album. Jeez. I don't know where to go. Anyway, I need to explain this program so that we know what we're listening to. This is a very unusual piano program. It's unique. It's mostly short pieces. I think the longest work is 6 minutes long, but a lot of them are a minute or less. And it goes by pretty quickly at 51 minutes. And then you hear the other program, which is another 51 minutes, which is, anyway, the same, except on a different instrument. So Ólafsson writes a long program note for this, and he starts it by quoting a character from Muriel Sparks' novel, A Far Cry from Kensington. And the character is Nancy Hawkins, and she's giving advice to aspiring novelists. She says, "You are writing a letter to a friend." That's the way the quality a novel should have. You're really writing to one person. And this is true, having written a novel too. You don't want to please the crowd. You want to write to the one person reading your book. Because basically, even if a million people are reading your book, each of them is one person. See, they're not doing it as an audience. So a novel audience is pretty unique that way. Well, that's not really true of a piano program, but that's what Ólafsson wanted on this album. Privacy and focus come from trying to delight and interest only one person. And that's the way that effect is achieved, the intimacy. You're just thinking of that one person and focusing on them. It allows for a sense of safety, authenticity, and playfulness. And really, that's what attracts us to art, really. Safety, well, we feel safe when we're in the artistic world. The art is authentic, and it's playful. Usually that's what really makes us enjoy it the most. On this album, Ólafsson says he's writing a letter to György Kurtág, a composer he has admired for decades, and who's now a friend. Now, Kurtág, a Hungarian composer, is still alive. He will celebrate his 97th birthday on February 19th. So he's 96 right now, but he's about to turn 97. That's amazing. And he's still active as far as I know. This is in response to the time he met Kurtág for about 2 hours in the Budapest Music Center. But instead of writing a thank you in a letter, he put together this musical program, which I think is a really nice idea. Wow, why not? Just put a musical program together for your friend. He wanted to respond because he realized that in the middle of the schedule of practicing, rehearsals, concerts, airport transfers, emails online meetings, all the stuff that makes up the life of a modern classical musician, he felt like that evening in Budapest had reacquainted him with some musical essence. Yeah, I get this. Because you get caught up. You get in your career, even if you're an artist, you get caught up in the day-to-dayness of things. But then there are these little moments, that kind of remind you of why you're doing this in the first place. And I think that's what happens here. He says the meeting with Kurtág brought him joy. The program, therefore, is very personal to Ólafsson, consisting of music from his childhood. So there's a lot of Bach, Mozart, Schumann, Bartók. There are Icelandic and Hungarian folk songs, and they all fall amongst a trail of shiny little stones in a moonlit forest, which are the works of Kurtág himself. Now, Kurtág, I think I remember this. The program weaves short works from Kurtág's ongoing project, Játékok, which are these very brief 1-minute works. And it means games, Játékok. And that's basically what they are. They're just kind of these little amusing reflections on other music, really. I remember one of them. It's not on this album, but there's one called the Crazy Girl with the Flaxen Hair, which is kind of a takeoff on Debussy's, of course, Girl with the Flaxen Hair, La Fille Chevaux de Lin. But in Kurtág's piece, you hear the dun 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 dun. It just keeps repeating over and over again because she's crazy. Right. So it's things like that. It's really funny. And it's really charming things. I'm a little bit sad that was not on this one because I really like that. But there are loads of them now because he's been writing these his whole life. The project Játékok it'll end with his death basically. But there are probably hundreds of them by now. Anyway, on this album, Ólafsson had a Steinway grand piano that his mother taught students on. And then later he had an upright piano in his bedroom. It was not entirely in tune. Do I remember the pianos of my youth? I don't think any of them were ever in tune.
My mother sounded like a saloon piano.
Yeah, mine had like notes that wouldn't sound and all kinds of things, Anyway, on this album, the same program is recorded twice, a grand piano on CD1, an upright piano with a layer of felt covering the strings on CD2. And it kind of acts as a permanent soft pedal. Ólafsson remarks that George Kurtag and his late wife Marta recorded many of the forehand Bach transcriptions and pieces from Jattekock on a felt-softened upright piano with marvelous results. There are recordings of these that you can hear. For Ólafsson, nothing will ever replace the large, resplendent canvas and unlimited colors of the grand piano. But on the upright, there's a confidentiality, a whispering intimacy to the sound that he loves to experiment with. The mics are very close on the upright recording so that you can hear the keys being pressed and released. Yes, you can. The pedals creaking and the pianist breathing. Well, I needed headphones for that, but I didn't have it all that loud, really, when I was listening through the speakers. Ólafsson was going for the effect of having the listener sitting on the piano bench with him on that upright piano album. Yeah. But to be honest, the grand piano disc is also very quiet. Also, due to the percussive materiality of the upright and the absence of forgiving overtones, new timings and textures were required in the interpretations, as well as a different attention to structure. Okay, let's go through the program. I'll try to kind of hit both pianos with each track. The first work we start with is by Bach, Christe du Lamm Gottes, Christ, the Lamb of God, from his Orgelbuchlein, BWV 619. This is arranged by George Kurtag. Let's see, this one, it's arranged by Kurtag. I'm guessing it's for a single piano, because it sounds like it's a single piano here. We're immediately in the unique sound world Ólafsson creates with his pinpoint, gentle touch. This entire album, by the way, is very quiet. Yeah. You can be generous with the volume if you like. Now, the music itself isn't always gentle, but the volume is. There's lots of sustain on the individual notes. The recording is close, as is always the case with Ólafsson. He generally plays without loud attacks, and he conjures a murky cloud of bass sustain in the lower end on the grand piano version. The upright piano version of this piece is even more muted than the grand piano version, as you would imagine, with less sustain, so it's played a bit faster. I noticed the melody notes are getting harder accents to throw them into higher relief on the upright piano version. Track 2 is Robert Schumann, Study in Canonic Form, Opus 56, number 1. Not a piece that you hear very often. This sounds like there's a mute pedal, the una corda pedal, the one on the left of the grand piano, being used for the gentle attack on this piece, which feels like snow flurries gently pattering the ground. Like the opening track, this one is brief at just under 2 minutes. You could say the opening pieces come across as conversation starters, light talk between friends. The ending is warmly played. And it sounds like there's very little or no sustain pedal on the upright piano version. The rippling effect of the texture comes across more starkly. Again, this sounds faster than the grand piano version. There's a bell-like sound as the key notes played are thrown into high relief, with the bass really submerged here, but still audible. I'm amazed always at the quietness that Ólafsson is able to conjure in the bass notes. It's like he's just kind of touching the keys, and they just kind of just kiss the strings, sort of. It's really amazing. He really is unique that way. Third track, Bach, Adagio from Sonata for Solo Violin number 3 in C major, BWV 1005. This is arranged by Ólafsson. In this, guys, the Adagio, it's barely recognizable because we're used to hearing it on the solo violin, and there's no harmony, which it's only suggested there. So the timbres of the piano, too, is so different from the violin, and there are gentle chords adding harmony, guiding the ear. This is gently played with a beautiful tone, ringing in the high end. Ólafsson's gradations of tone are remarkable. He gets an even gentler attack in the mid-range of the piano when the melody moves there. There's a nice realization of the false cadence at 3 minutes and 13 seconds. A very veiled tone on the upright piano with decent sustain used here. The false cadence appears at 3 minutes and 4 seconds, and the playing is very subdued and quiet. Track 4, we finally arrive at Kurtag. This is his harmonica, Homage à Borso de Laszlo from Jattekock, Book 3. The Kurtag pieces are all very brief and playful. This has some odd harmonies, and it sounds a bit jokey after the Bach, as it should. It's from his games collection, after all. But it fits in well. The harmonies are mostly gentle, and the playing is very quiet. This comes across very differently on the upright, though. The modern harmonies really benefit from the sustain of the grand piano. Here they deteriorate quickly, and some barely sound. It's an interesting profile. Track 5, we get 3 Bartók pieces, 3 Hungarian folk songs from Csík, C-S-I-K. S-Z, I think that's Zekeli, 35A. First movement, rubato. This is interesting, I thought. It comes across on the grand piano as more Debussyan than Bartókian, at least in the way Ólafsson plays it. The phrasing of the melody is a bit smoothed out, and the melodic contours are rounded with a muted attack, and it's over at 1 minute and 11 seconds. I always kind of feel like Ólafsson, I don't know, being Icelandic, he kind of removes the paprika from Bartók's harmony and phrasing. It's a little smoother. It sounded more kind of like impressionistic to me. Oddly, on the upright piano, this comes across as more of a Hungarian song. Ólafsson's shaping of the phrases is very subtly crafted. Track 6 is the second movement, Lo stesso tempo. This one's even shorter and is a bit more active than the first song. It's taken slowly, and the harmony comes across more vividly of all elements, as in the first piece, reminding me again of Debussy. I'm hearing mostly the harmony here. I feel like that's what he's accenting on the grand piano. On the upright piano, the trills in the theme have a strong hammered percussive quality to them. There's something more cymbalom-like about the upright piano performance. And track 7 is movement 3 of the 3 Hungarian folk songs, Poco Vivo. Ólafsson connects these 3 pieces like they're kind of one movement with 3 sections. And we have this brief song played in the manner of the first 2. They all sound rather precious, caressed out of the piano, with the rich 20th century harmonic palette making the biggest impression. On the upright, I had mentioned Debussy, but here the harmonies on the upright don't come across in the same way, probably due to the lack of sustain. Here the accompaniment is more harp-like on the upright, with the melody in great contrast right up front. Okay, here we have another interesting interpretation of Brahms' Intermezzo in E major, Opus 116, number 4. Ólafsson maintains the same type of attack for this piece as he used in the Bartók, showing its affinity to Bartók's harmonic coloring. As is often the case with Ólafsson, this doesn't come across as the familiar Brahms work we've heard many times. It comes across more like a silhouette of the work we know, probably due to the soft attack that Ólafsson uses. Now, this is a pretty quiet piece anyway, but it really sounds unfamiliar here. The long pregnant pauses between phrases add to that. Ólafsson finds new ways of phrasing to give the work a sense of unfamiliarity, or shows us an unrecognized side of the work that we weren't aware of, like finding out something new about an old friend. You know, you kind of know what your friend looks like, and then he shows up wearing this wild suit or something more subdued that he normally wears in this case, I guess. And you're like, hey, is that you? I didn't know. Okay, that's kind of what I felt like here. So far, there's nothing on this album that would wake you out of a doze. The playing is also close to the keys and gentle. At 2 minutes and 35 seconds into the Brahms piece, there is some discrete pedal to enrich the sound of the piano. In the upright piano version, this still doesn't come up as the Brahms work I'm familiar with. It's much quieter and phrased in Ólafsson's idiosyncratic way, but differently than in the grand piano version. The sustain on the notes is very short, due not only to the instrument, but to the quiet level that Ólafsson is playing at. There's a strong muted quality to the main figure when it reappears at 3 minutes and 22 seconds, and we get some volume afterwards as well. Track 9, back to György Kurtág. This piece is called A Voice in the Distance from Játékok Book 5. 5 or 5, I don't know, I may have made a mistake there, 5B. This is very quietly taken and a very sparse melody that's allowed to sustain. It's muted, and it reminds me a bit of Debussy's, if you know his Footprints in the Snow prelude. It comes across as mysterious. The upright piano version is very muted and the accompaniment is distantly registering, the bass notes sounding almost puddle-like you have this kind of bass puddle that you've stepped in, and all these sort of higher notes are, it's just kind of wetting all those higher notes, sort of. The higher notes all register pretty strongly. Okay, track 10, this is kind of interesting. Snorri Sigfús Birgisson, Where Life and Death May Dwell. This is an Icelandic folk song. It's interesting because I was just listening to a piece by this composer today on an album of Icelandic choral music. So here he is again. I think this is a setting, though, of a song that already existed. It's more melodic than the atmospheric Kurtág piece that preceded it. There's a softly cushioned attack that we've been hearing throughout, and a pretty melody that's rather inconclusively ended. On the upright version, the playing is highly muted. The repeated notes in the theme come across more percussively, and the material in the higher end is accented more strongly to make it sustain more, I guess. Track 11 is Bach, Allegro Moderato from Trio Sonata No. 1 in E-flat major, BWV 525, arranged by George Kurtag. And this features Ólafsson's wife, Halla Odni Magnúsdóttir, as the third hand. This is arranged for 3 hands on 1 piano. Here with the third hand playing, we hear something louder and more lively, breaking the spell of the first 10 tracks a bit. Ólafsson and Halla blend well together. It's funny, though, you could tell which hand is Halla's, because her playing has a brighter attack to it. Ólafsson has a really unique sound. He's very muted and cushioned in his attack, even when he's not using the unicorda pedal. On the upright piano version, the melodic material is played with a staccato feel, and despite the instrument, Ólafsson manages amazing gradations of volume and tone in the separate voices. They all seem to have different textures of tone as well as attack. Track 12, Sigvaldi Kaldalóns, Ave Maria, arranged by Ólafsson. Kaldalóns, he's a pretty interesting character himself, who was an Icelandic doctor who composed between seeing patients and going on house calls. So he's kind of like, who's the American poet? William Carlos Williams. He was a dentist that he wrote poems in between seeing patients. And Borodin was another one. I think he was a doctor as well. He just composed in his spare time. Anyway, that's Kaldalóns. This work is often heard at weddings, this Ave Maria, and funerals in Iceland, but was written for the theater. Go figure. The upright version is it has a cloudy arpeggiated bass attack achieved by subtle pedaling. I'm sorry, this is the grand piano version. It has a cloudy arpeggiated bass attack achieved by subtle pedaling and Ólafsson's characteristic soft attack. The melody just reaches its head above this quiet accompaniment, keeping to a quiet melodic profile itself. The melody is soothing and very pretty. And in the upright version, not much sustain on the upright. It has a more veiled tone, but the gradation of tone between the accompaniment and melody is amazing. The tone in the accompanying arpeggiated figure is very muted. Track 13, Kurtag, Little Chorale from Yatakok Book 1. This, like the previous Yatakok chosen for this recording, all the previous ones, is quiet and spacious. I just want to mention that Kurtag's Yatakok works aren't all like this. Ólafsson has chosen the real quiet chord-based ones for this recording, but there are loads of them and they are in every imaginable mood. All right. Anyway, in this one, there's a chord crescendo that gets interrupted, then an odd chord, and the piece ends. It's rather amusing. On the upright version, gently struck chords allowed to ring and sustaining rather well on the upright piano. I guess with the sustain pedal all the way down and just the right level of attack, it's a far more matte sound than the grand piano has. And then we get to track 14, Mozart. Whoa. Laudate Dominum. This is not a piano work. It's arranged by Ólafsson for the piano here. He arranged this after he and Kurtag discussed Mozart during their meeting. All composers do this. Mozart is, along with Bach, the king. I mean, he's just so great. There's just no getting around it. Composers just love him. I love him too. He's the most performed composer in the world, and as it should be, I say. Anyway, this has a pretty standard Chopinesque arpeggiated bass under Mozart's melody. Again, one gets the sense of the hammers being given just enough pressure to sound the accompaniment as the melodic material rings out a bit more. And what a smooth, buttery trill we get just before the ending. On the upright version, much like the previous works, this one comes across with a more matte music box quality to it. The melody is differentiated from the arpeggiated accompaniment by touch, and the arpeggiated part has a very different veiled sound to it, whereas the melody is fairly bright. Track 15, George Kurtag, Sleepily from Yatakok Book 1. Getting into a little theme here of sleep. This work starts with interesting chords, followed by an upright scale, then another chord, then a descending scale. Timbres are harsh but faint. The gentle harmonics caused by the complex chords hover above the keyboard. This really is a lead-in thematically to the next piece, also about sleep. The upright version has some pretty interesting woody percussive sounds on this one during light scalar runs. Interesting textures on the upright version that we don't hear on the grand piano version. Track 16, continuing the theme of sleep, is Schumann's very famous Traumare from his Scenes from Childhood. Opus 15, number 7. It's amazing to me that this work doesn't stand out, but it seems of a piece with what we're hearing. It's recognizable as the famous Schumann piece, but it's an interpretation, as is so often the case with Ólafsson, that keeps with the tone of the program and is phrased in Ólafsson's unique way. He plays this with light retards in it. It sounds like it goes by fast, so I think he's focusing on the melodic shape of the lines and of the whole structure of the piece. It doesn't attempt to suspend time as, for example, Horowitz's performances of this do. The upright version is taken at a faster speed still, and I guess making sure all the voices connect. All harmonies are clearly audible. This comes across as more stark on the upright version, without the rich overtones of the grand. We seem to get through this pretty fast. All lines are well outlined and connected. Not much heart on sleeve going on here. Track 17, Kurtag, Flowers We Are, from Jacek, Book 5. There's no pause between this and Schumann. This is a quieter movement with piece with long sustained notes in the arpeggiated chords that make up the material. On the upright version, harmonics are the key, but they're muted on the smaller upright and fade quickly. There's a bit of harmonic cloud generated on the upright version. Track 18, a little surprise. Thomas Addis, contemporary composer. His work, The Branch, which is actually originally has a Hungarian title, Az Ag. Addis is a friend of Kurtag's and wrote this piece specifically for this album. It's named after the Hungarian poem Az Ag by Sándor Vere, who lived from 1913 to 1989. This could be of a piece with the Kurtag works. It's soft, it sounds inventive, and it's brief at 1 minute and 21 seconds. It's very quiet, with some enticing chords, quietly taken, and lots to hear in the harmonic cloud. On the upright version, this comes with a more ghostly feel, with the chords sort of popping the harmony out of the piano. Track 19, Kurtag, Twittering, from Jacek, Book 1. This features Ólafsson's wife again, Halla Odni Magnusdóttir. This is for 4 hands on one keyboard. In this one, it's called Twittering, and Halla, Ólafsson's wife, is the bird, with Víkingur as the forest. It comes across as rather abstract, with bird twitterings in the high end and a repeated figure in the middle range. On the upright version, the repeated high note here almost sounds metallic in its tapping quality. The rest is played so quietly, it's as if it wants to trigger the harmonics only. The upright version of that is pretty interesting. Track 19. Track 20, Schumann, Vogel als Prophet, Opus 82, number 7. This has a familiar melody, a bit more slowly played here than usual. The accompanying chords are very quiet, and the arpeggiated chords leading up to the melody are thrown into relief. At 1 minute and 30 seconds, we're into a middle section, more chord-based, and played with more firmness by Ólafsson. By 2 minutes and 17 seconds, we're back to the opening material, sensitively played, more so as it goes on, right up to the subtle ending notes. The upright version has a veiled, muted quality to the melody, and the melodic material is in stark relief. Track 21, we get another Brahms intermezzo, the one in E minor, Opus 116, number 5. The gentle attack and cushioned sound make this come across more abstractly than usual, as was the case with the previous Brahms intermezzo that we heard. Not like the meditative romantic work I generally hear it as. It's amazing how Ólafsson makes everything he plays sound so new and reimagined. The upright version is taken at a much quicker speed to connect the 2-chord phrases. It achieves a bit of an arpeggiated flow to it in the first minute. These works really catch Brahms in a private mood and are well in keeping with the theme of this album. Ólafsson, especially here I'd say, draws out the private nature of Brahms' work exceptionally well. And track 22, we end with George Kurtag, the man of the hour on this album. Scraps of a Kolinda melody, faintly recollected. Homage a Farkas Ferenc from Jacek, Book 3. This is the longest of the Kurtag works on this recording at 3 minutes and 20 seconds. The rest of them are just about a minute long. The opening melody is monophonic, as is so often the case with works in Jacek, and is played with plenty of sustain, despite the quiet sound. Ólafsson allows the notes to sustain to maximum length on the grand piano. The piece just ends with one of the notes sustaining to silence without a sense of resolution. With the grand piano version of this album, you could easily doze off and not be aware of the wispy sounds that add together to make up the program. There are really no shocks. There's some harmonic dissonances, but nothing that's really going to jolt you out of your sort of the way you're feeling, if you happen to be close enough. On the upright version, a more muted tone is heard, which sustains fairly well. The percussive quality of the hammer hitting the string registers especially in the mid-range notes. So, man, really wiped out talking about this, just thinking about it again. It's an album that did kind of wipe me out. There was a lot to listen to. Ólafsson's music is always just so interesting. His playing, I should say, is so interesting. And he's put together a pretty unique program here. I would say this album is something for late night contemplation, especially one if you've happened to have a late night coffee and you have insomnia and you're not going to go to bed anytime soon. This is really ideal for that. The program is about 51 minutes long in both versions, and it's easy to sit through and absorb in a single listening section. In fact, I felt rather compelled by the playing to hear the whole thing being led from piece to piece by Ólafsson's playing. So I did listen to this in 2 sittings, but I listened to the entire program all the way through because it was really that compelling. It was hard to stop. You just didn't want to kind of turn it off. It's an enjoyable record and remarkably sensitive playing. In fact, it's practically all very quiet playing. Hearing the program on 2 instruments is something that will excite piano nerds like me. And I'm wondering, though, how many of them are out there? Let's find out. This album provides an example of what our podcast, really, Adult Music, is about, breaking down a program and discussing the results of differing approaches. Basically, this album is almost like a musical manifestation of what we're trying to do on this podcast. Ólafsson really is one of the most fascinating classical pianists out there, and for that reason alone, this merits a listen. It actually feels like an interesting evening spent in his private company. I don't feel like it would have been an evening better spent doing something else. Does anybody know the story of Sally Chisholm? She was pals with Billy the Kid and Pat Garrett, and she rather famously said about them that both were worth knowing. And I really feel like that's the case with Ólafsson himself. If you just spend some time with this album, I think you'll find that Ólafsson, for his playing, is worth knowing. And so is Kurtag, too.
Well, I'm really a big fan of Ólafsson's playing. I listen to him a lot. And this was interesting because whereas he kind of dazzled me with technique on especially the previous Bach recording and the Mozart one too, this one's all about subtle expression. But moreover, this one is all about the programming, as you just explained in detail. And that's what he seems to, the more releases I listen to from him, the programming is what draws me back. So this is 2 sets of recordings of the same works on different pianos. That's a very unique idea. And
I'm amazed that Deutsche Grammophon went for it, too. Yeah. You have to have really the record company's trust
I guess after he got the feather on the cover of that one, he could do anything he wanted. Yeah.
But that's right.
The muted upright's so closely recorded and intimate, you do really feel like you're sitting with him, and it creates completely different impressions of the pieces than the grand piano. And with the programming here, just as on the Debussy Rameau recording, which alternated works by the 2 composers, and it really kind of defied my expectations. I didn't think that was going to work out, and somehow it does. And the more I listen to it, it's just really interesting.
That's actually my favorite recording by him, by Ólafsson, the Debussy Rameau.
So here the programming mix, Bach, Mozart, Brahms, Schumann, mixed with Kurtag. It doesn't seem like this is going to work. And I really don't know what to make of Kurtag a lot of times when I've heard his music. But here, in these small portions, it's sort of like getting a food that you don't normally eat and you're not so crazy about, but you have it in a buffet or on a dish with all these other things that just sort of make it work, in that kind of small amount. And I thought the contrast with the other works made it easier for my ears to digest the Kurtag and savor the little morsels of it. And so, another really interesting approach to a program. I just wonder what he'll come up with next, but I'll be sure to be interested to check it out as soon as it comes out.
Oh, me too. Absolutely. Yeah. I want to say one more thing. He's Icelandic, but he seems to have been in this sort of schooled Hungarian kind of way of learning to play the piano. I really do admire them because in America, what did we use? I used like Czerny and, the German stuff, really, that we learn. And if you're going to learn harmony, you're going to do Walter Piston, right?
Right.
But in Hungary, they use Bartók and now Kurták too, and Kodai. So they have this really cool music that all those composers wrote these sort of graded sort of set of works for a pianist to learn the piano on. And I think that's just so amazing. I really envy them that. I think they get this really unique sort of music education there. Anyway, so I did get a little taste of that on this album, I think. Okay. I need a drink after that. But I've still got one more album to go. And this is another one that I really liked a lot. Actually, it was more appealing than I thought it would be. This is, last week we did a record of Estonian orchestral music. This week we're doing Latvian chamber music. The album is called PPP, not for Pianissimo, but more, the P's are all for the three, the last names of the three composers on the album. They're Latvian composers, and they are Pēteris Plakidis, Kristaps Petersons, and George Pelecis. I hope I said those names right. This is by Gidon Kremer, the violinist, and Kremerata Baltica. And this is on the SKANI label, which is a Latvian label, division of the Latvian Music Information Center, or LMIC. Gidon Kremer is really one of the world's great violinists, and he's been championing Latvian music his whole life. He rather famously recorded the Pēteris Vasks violin concerto Distant Light and made that a famous work. And he's also very famously on the Estonian composer Arvo Pärt's very famous album, which he recorded with Keith Jarrett doing Fratres. And on the ECM label, that's another one of those records, along with Feather on the Breath of God by Gothic Voices. That's one of those recordings that everybody who likes classical music has to have. It's required listening. Anyway, here we're getting a feast of Latvian music. These titles are all given in the original Latvian first on the album. I'm not going to even try to pronounce those, so I'm just going for the English titles here. Okay. Apologies to Latvian listeners, although we are doing the album. So anyway, tracks 1 through 3, the composer Pēteris Plakidis. He lived 1947 to 2017. He is the only deceased. Is he? Let me see. Yeah, he's the only deceased composer on this album. The rest are all contemporary. This is his little concerto for 2 violins. And the violinists here are Gidon Kremer and Madara Petersons. This was composed in 1991. All right, there are 3 movements to this. And the only thing we hear are 2 violins playing together. The first track is called Singing Together. This has an immediately appealing quality. If you're kind of afraid of the big bad contemporary music, you should just go right to this album. I think you'll like it. The 2 violins are playing the same theme in the beginning, repeating and overlapping them. It's folk-like and cheerful, no vibrato, and it sounds playful. Just all these things that invite us into listening and even playing music. Soon the material starts moving beyond its initial melody, providing accompaniment and a harmony, while the other violin melodizes. The initial theme is never far away. At 2 minutes and 25 seconds is a rather melting theme, slowly taken, with great character by the 2 soloists. We get one more rapid iteration of the opening material before reaching the end. All we hear in this piece are the 2 violins, of course. Second movement is called Evening Music. A very quiet, fragmented opening is heard here, either by one violin or by the 2 who are kind of assembling each other's lines. I can't really tell. I'd have to see it to know. We clearly hear both violins by the 27-second mark, as one provides a repeated arpeggiated line and the other a very conjunct melody, meaning there are no leaps in it. Again, it's immediately appealing and a rather minimalist in approach. Once the interacting lines get going, they keep repeating similar material and similar textures. At 3 minutes and 38 seconds, we get a louder violin line, actually piercing through the texture and playing above the drone, and repeating figures in the accompanying violin. By the 5th minute, the violin in the bass range has the main melody as the upper violin plays figuration. Again, this is appealing all the way through. And very simple, too. It's very easy on the ear and the brain. The third movement, the Road, has an upward ticking motion, starting it off on one of the violins. The other plays a shorter, quicker line against it. We start again in minimalist feel with a lot of repeating patterns. As in the previous movement, one of the violins rises above the material and plays more melodic material. The ticking rhythm is constant throughout, at least in outline. It's always implied when it's not heard. At 4 minutes and 12 seconds, there's a sudden pause, then a bit of a rhythmic change as the music becomes a bit more rustic sounding in the mid-range of the two violins, one of them rising up into the higher range. It ends on a rather humorous, good-natured last-second cadence. These works are a fun listen, and they sound fun to play also, should you play the violin and have a violin-playing friend. Get together and pick up this score. Track 4, Christoph Petersons, born in 1982. Ground for double bass solo, and he himself, the composer, is playing the double bass on this track. This sounds like a pizzicato octave starting the piece with a large interval of time in between attacks. There's a lot of quiet rumbling in the beginning, as though the work is to be enjoyed by the soloist and anyone standing close by. There's some impressively rich pluckings of the lowest strings as the piece goes on. The instrument is richly recorded here and produces a full sound. I rather enjoyed this piece. It's a very minimal composition, sort of a bass line, supporting no harmony above it, hence the term ground. A ground is like the ground bass, and then there's like sort of a set of variations above it. Here we get the ground only. Think of, if you know that Purcell piece, When I Am Laid in Earth, from Dido and Aeneas. It starts out with that ground bass, and then the vocalist starts singing. Try to imagine only hearing that bass line without the vocalist. And that's basically what you're getting here. The piece ends, but it's more interesting than that, I think. It doesn't just repeat. The piece ends with the bass simply stopping its bass line. Track 5. Whoa, this was really interesting. Pi equals 3.14 for 2 double basses, percussion, and recording. This one has Petersons, the composer, on the double bass, and Yuri Gavrilyuk plays the other double bass, Andrei Pushkarev on the vibraphone. The percussion and recorded elements provide some pretty interesting timbres in this almost 9-minute piece. The 2 basses are front and center, one digging into the bass end and the other playing material higher up. The recorded material sounds mostly electronic in the way you'd hear in the 1950s and 60s, so it's kind of spacey. I always feel relieved when the basses come back in this piece. I have to confess, I like their material. It's simple and appealing, a gift Peterson seems to have in composition. There's some cool, very low percussion or electronics from 3 minutes and 30 seconds onward that feel like they're excavating the wax out of my ear's lower range. I feel like it just loosened all the wax in my ears. Listen to this with a subwoofer in this piece. It's really very powerful and low. Well captured on the recording. I really didn't start to notice the vibraphone until the last few minutes of the piece. It may be there earlier, but it makes its presence felt more firmly toward the end, or it may have just entered at the end. Generally speaking, this piece takes on a minimal feel, and I rather liked it. There's nothing here that will chase tender-eared family members from the room. So I guess your wife stuck around for this one.
She might have.
Maybe. Don't remember. Okay, track 6 through 8.
In a couple of days. Where is she? Hey.
Oh, well, maybe that's why. It's the bass. All about that bass. It's always about the bass. Track 6 through 8. Christoph Petersons again. Music for a large ensemble. This is played by Kremerata Lettonica. The first movement, 8th note equals 124, is very brief at 52 seconds. It's got a percussive accompaniment and a guitar-like, or maybe the piano harp being plucked in the thematic material. I can't really tell what this instrument is. The large ensemble isn't used at all here. In track 2, 8th note equals 82, it's longer at 2 minutes and 29 seconds and starts more atmospherically with reverberating, gentle percussion sounds. The piece is basically a series of repeating patterns that crescendos overall, ending with a single drawn-out bowed note. The third movement and final movement, 8th note equals 124, same as the first movement. There's a repeating dancing figure on what sounds like a cello in this longest of the 3 movements. It's 5 minutes and 39 seconds. The percussion, mostly vibraphone it sounds like, is playing material above the dancing cello. Vibrato-less string chords come in and add their material. At 1 minute and 32 seconds, the entire texture and rhythm suddenly changes to something more static as the violin rhapsodizes. There are some pretty cool percussive sounds breaking out under a repeating low bass note from 2 minutes 30 seconds to 3 minutes. We even hear an electric guitar at one point from the 3-minute mark on, and we reach a more aggressive electric sound by the 5th minute. the first aggressive sounds on the album, really. It crescendos and suddenly stops with only a violin in its very high range, squeaking out a single note for the ending. The last track on the album is by Georges Pelecis, I hope, I don't know, Pelecis, with a line over the E. He was born in 1947. 3 pieces from Fiori Musicali, performed by Kremerata Baltica. This acts as a follow-up to a work called Flowering Jasmine, which Pelecis wrote in 2007 for Gidon Kremer. The piece is named Fiori Musicali after Girolamo Frescobaldi's collection of liturgical organ music from the 17th century. Pelecis says he writes music to express his delight in the mightiness and beauty of God's creation. This is a very common theme with East European countries, by the way. They really do tend to look to nature and to God's creation as their inspiration. The natural elements and landscapes, the seasons, flora and fauna, are life's inexhaustible forms and the endless varieties of its beauty. To be honest, not a bad way to spend one's life, celebrating the beauty of nature, of God's creation. And not a bad way to end the album, either. Track 1, The Lone Kala, features Andrei Pushkarev on vibraphone, was composed in 2017. It starts with warm strings, a chord is repeated twice, then the thematic material builds from there. Non-vibrato, it's a masked but stark sound. The music will pass between phrases, then resume. It's a rather tranquil work. There's a volume swell to the second minute that quickly dissipates. The pattern of short phrases, repeated short phrase, extension, holds until around 3 minutes and 30 seconds when there's a sudden change to a percussive sound, a metallic tone with vibrato. That's the vibraphone. We never go back to the strings. The piece ends on a tonic with the percussion. It's a simple piece and satisfying. Second movement, Dance of the Peonies, written in 2020. Circling string figures with louder 2-note bowed phrases acting as thematic material. By the 47-second mark, the thematic material warms up and provides something more open-hearted and bright. The melodic form is simple. It's sort of call and response, A-B. Sort of. At 2 minutes and 42 seconds, there's a contrast. The strings quieten and thin out for a new theme with pizzicato in the accompaniment. There's a louder bowed outburst heard twice. The second time it takes over and generates material until about the 4 minute and 50-second mark when the quieter material finally returns. And this ends with a lovely harmonic chords. The third movement and final movement, Kosmea Melancholy, featuring Gidon Kremer on violin and Andrei Pushkarev on vibraphone, composed in 2020. It has a stark opening in the lower strings, with violin playing the main melody, sounding rather veiled in tone in an interesting way. The percussion, the vibraphone, comes in gently at 2 minutes and 19 seconds, playing the melody as the violin plays a counter melody, and the piece sort of resolves at the end. Now, I really liked this album, and part of the reason is, when I remember hearing music like this in the 1980s, now this is all post-1980 music, from Eastern Europe and from Russia at the time, which would have been the Soviet Union at the time. It had a lightness to it that belied the really heavy, oppressive, intellectual contemporary music we were hearing in the 1970s and 1960s, the electronic music, the 12-tone, dodecaphonic, abstract sort of music. This was really different than that, and I think this is sort of in that sort of family. All these works were composed long after, or in the case of the Plakidis, just right after the Soviet Union fell. And I found it to be a relief at the time. It surprised me that it was coming out of the Soviet Union, too. I wondered what was going on there, and it turns out that it was quite a lot, as we know from Arvo Pärt in Estonia. This album put me in mind of those newer, lighter discoveries that I made like when I was younger, so I immediately took to it. It told me that classical music didn't have to be ponderous and heavy and making big statements all the time, but could be light and fun as well, as was especially the first work on this album. The works on the album are easy to listen to and immediately appealing. I wouldn't call them childlike, but perhaps they're reminiscent of the feeling of childhood in the way that Schumann's scenes from childhood are, like childhood from an adult perspective. Well, I'm sure Latvian composers are producing heavier music than this. I think of Peteris Vasks. This is a refreshing album for the ears, much more so than last week's album of Estonian symphonic works, which was heavier, but excellent, but a lot heavier. Immediately appealing and a pleasant discovery all the way through. It all feels very fresh to me and ready to proceed onward from its current point. This music feels like it's at the beginning of something, like it could generate even more interesting music in the future. And I would recommend hearing it. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, I'm going to have to listen to this some more to really have a feel for it. I mean, other than being Latvian as the common theme for the music, and having more vibes on one recording than anything classical we've listened to before. That was kind of interesting.
That's a good thing, though.
The works all have a very different nature and character to them, so you're going to get shifted through a variety of material. I guess the easiest one for me to enjoy was the first one, the Plakidis, just the two violins. And normally I'm not a huge fan of just violin music, but this was really enjoyable. These kind of modal things, very rhythmic, lots of interplay and excitement. As you said, if you play violin and you have a friend, this would be a real fun one to work on, I think. It's just got a lot of exciting interaction between the two. And the Petersons, I guess, I don't know, when they have like recording and electronics things, I generally don't like that kind of thing. Although
I did like the very low, kind of like, removing the fillings from your teeth sound that the Pi equals 3.14 had.
Yeah,
I love those low bass sounds.
And the vibes in there with the violins. That was kind of interesting. I have to listen to this one again. And then I think it was a guitar in there.
Yeah, there was a guitar.
Yeah, so it's the combination of instrumentation was very interesting. And I guess I like the last piece too. The how do you say this? Pelecis?
Pelecis? That's what I'm saying. Yeah. I don't know.
Well, it's kind of interesting.
Okay.
I like the flowing movements in the first movement there, and the ringing vibes are really surprising at the end too. And some of the string works are interesting, that kind of lightly tiptoeing kind of pizzicato in there in the string sections. And overall, it was kind of taking me to different places because there was a lot of variety there. And as you said, it's not a bombastic kind of giant sound recording. It's kind of medium range, and I think
it's rather modest. Really,
it's modest, yeah. But for getting a picture of Latvian music in sort of modern times with new composers, it was kind of instructive to me. I'll probably give it another listen and see what my second impression of these works is like.
I want to say to our Latvian listeners, I do try to get the pronunciations of the composers' names from the internet, but I couldn't find these. So if they're wrong, I once dated a Latvian woman. If only she was still around, I could get those pronunciations right. But she's long gone. It's too bad.
Sorry to hear that. All right. I'm going to transition to the jazz section now. And to start out, I've got another piano trio debut recording that I'm really excited about. And I just think it's bursting with energy and lots of uniqueness here. And last week we were in the Netherlands. This week we're going to go to Spain with Adrián Royo Trío. This is on Errabal jazz label and Pangea. And I don't know much about Royo. There's not a lot online about him other than he studied piano performance, jazz studies as well, at Fundació Conservatori Liceo. And that's all I know about him, other than he's got this killer debut recording out here. Along with him on piano, we've got Gonzalo del Val on drums and Manel Fortia on bass. And a really interesting album cover there. And it opens with the title track, Pangea. And so this idea of a one continent kind of thing and things emerging in a developing world comes through this first track. It starts out with a repeating D and C notes kind of thing going on that continues on the piano. There's some ghostly harmonic bass bowing that adds a primeval mystery to the sound. Clicky drums and what might be an udu drum in there get a beat going as the bass switches to short rhythmic bows. Then there's a repeated 8-bar low bowed bass and piano left-hand melody line. Next, an 8-bar transition section with just added syncopated piano chords over the rhythm that continues. It still feels in 4, but another 8 bars with more animated syncopated piano leads into a section with more chiming high note piano chords, ending with some tricky syncopated ending phrases. and bass and left-hand piano figures. It sort of resets to the opening rhythm without the piano alternating notes this time. And Fortea is up on bass for a bowed bass solo that bends, pitches, and ends in furious fast bows under trickling piano figures with descending harmonies. A new groove forms over a solid bass ostinato, and Royo works up a piano solo. It has cool changing modal harmonies, but focuses on percussive, accented, syncopated playing. He works that back into the chiming chords we heard before, with some trills added and the same ending lines of bass and piano. Then we go back to the opening alternating notes and a little bit of the bass melody before some final percussion jamming over rhythmic bass bowing and short, maybe kind of muted piano notes to end it. It's an exciting tune and gives you this feeling of a new world developing out of something. I was really captivated from this one. Track 2 is called Palitos, which I think means sticks, as in like claves, percussive clicking sticks. There's a 2-bar drum intro. It brings it into a melody of really fast, snappy right-hand figures on the piano over open fifth chords, starting with the same C and D that we heard in the previous track, Pangea. It seems to be a 24-bar form with a modulated B section and then an extra 4 bars of a transition into a rhythmic change-up to a blazing swing for a solo from Royo over furious walking on the bass by Fortea. His really energy-packed but smooth runs and rhythmic figures in his right hand and more percussive left-hand chords. He finishes the solo with a great synced line with the bass. Delval has been keeping up speedy cymbal work, but now he gets a drum solo, working less busy ideas with nice ringing snare and tom work. And they finish up with another run through the melody and that cool figure we heard at the end of the piano solo. Another high-energy tune. Now we're going to get something a little different. Track 3, Bangkok. And I don't know how he's doing this at the beginning of the tune. Maybe it's some type of muting on the piano strings, or he's actually striking the strings. I'm not sure. But it creates...
Yeah, it sounds plucked to me. Yeah. Like he's...
Well, I'm thinking more hammered, like a bouncy kind of dulcimer type of effect it's achieved. It's like this cool oriental type pentatonic kind of opening section. And the rhythmic effect is kind of like a mallet striking would be doing on an instrument. Well, that goes on for about 45 seconds, and then rhythmic alternating piano chords get a 5/4 groove started. Delval adds a clicky beat and Fortea a hypnotic bass, and it works into a different feel with more flowing piano lines for a section before going back to the rhythmic piano figures and featuring some cool bass and left-hand piano rising and falling lines. Royo picks up on those line ideas with his right hand to move into a piano solo that has some ascending percussive chords that disguise the meter and morph it into a heavy swing and now 4/4 with 12-bar altered chord blues phrases for soloing. It's a really cool change, and Fortea digs in hard on walking bass. Royo's bursting with ideas in short running phrases and percussive chords with some bluesy ideas too over the changing harmonies. They end up with the ascending chord idea again, leading back into the 5/4 groove from the beginning of the main tune. They go through the flowing section to a pause, and then some final rubato piano and cool rising bass glisses for an ending. So it's a very cool construction and meter switch from 5/4 to 4/4, and you go all the way from that weird Asian atmosphere opening into the blues solo section. So a really interesting combination of sound elements. Track 4 is called Technology. This one starts with an 8-measure piano phrase of a busy triplet figures over left-hand intervals, and the whole idea descends. They repeat it, and Delval adds soft brush skittering on the drums. I was feeling it in 4 when I started to hear it, but the next section makes it clear that it's a 6/8 kind of meter. It's an 8-bar section repeated with interval figures worked together in the piano and bass. Next is another repeated 8-bar section, this time with the piano working the rhythmic melody idea and ringing low bass notes below. Fortea comes out of that with a bass solo with great ringing tone, cool hammered on notes, and an unhurried but rhythmic phrasing, including some cool harmonies. He makes it really sing on the bass. And then Delval had been sticking to soft textures on the drums under the bass, but it gets subdivided and busy again for a piano solo from Royo. It's rhythmically creative, and works up into great lines of ringing chimes and intense melody built around the theme. He really presses it with a yearning intensity. And they bring it back through the melody section we heard earlier to a sudden emphatic ending on a low F on the piano. Track 5, Halcon. Royo starts this one out on piano with a cool syncopated pattern of 4 chords in 2 measures of a 6-beat rhythm. He goes around that a couple times and then gets joined by bass for a couple rounds and then drums as well. They have a nice groove going and break it up once nicely before continuing on and introducing some piano melody lines that alternate with measures of the groove riff. There's a little more subdued strain of piano into some accented chords, and then the rhythmic rug gets pulled out from under you with a complete stop and some rubato piano and really zipping piano lines from Royo. He gets more delicate and flowing into more zipping and then some soft dissonances. And then the real fun begins here with the fast repeated left-hand rhythmic figure and his right hand taking off on a running journey of its own. It slows down, and his hands come together in movement to work into some ringing rhythmic figures to bring back the bass and drums, and that brings back the melody lines. And then some vamping on the riff for Derval to do some drum work as it fades out. Man, this is really exciting, high-energy tune here as well. All this is original compositions by Royo, I should add. Track 6, Reencuentro. A solo ringing bass starts it out. And Fortea plays some interesting stuff here, sometimes really hard attacks, intervals together and alternating with cool slides, and he brings it into tempo at the end, up high for the others to join in with a softer ballad melody and an interesting 17-measure length of phrase. Royo takes a round for a solo, ringing relaxed and pretty phrases with lush chords over the deep throbbing and ringing bass underneath, a Derval on soft brushing. Royo gets to show off a softer side with nice flowing high register lines. They take it through the melody another time with a little tag of piano trickles and percussion chimes. It's very subtle and pretty playing here by Royo. Track 7, Linea 1 or Uno, maybe. Back to the rhythmic business for this tune. It's in a 3-beat feel with a fast syncopated and subdivided bass and piano ostinato figure for the first 8 bars. The bass keeps it going while Royo mixes the piano ideas with chords and then snappy rhythmic right-hand figures for a couple rounds. Then it gets some harmonic movement and lightens up while keeping in tempo. Derval drops the driving drumming for cymbal textures and some other rain stick-like washy sounds. Royo moves it with gentle chords into a bass solo from Fortea. He builds tension with rising lines, sliding pitches, tense harmonies, and rapid articulation on tight high notes. It's like he's trying to reach the sky, but then slips away down into some cool bends and percussive bass ideas. It gets chugging again with bass and rhythmic chords from Royo, and they get back into the rhythmic pattern from the start and the different sections. And they finish it with a softer section with hi-hat, ringing bass, and light dancing high register lines from Royo. Track 8, Oborenes. Royo starts it out with a flowing triplet figure in the right hand over a rising interval idea in the bass. Drums and bass join in for a few cycles. Royo adds new higher right hand, sort of runs on the top. I said Garaldi-esque. I don't know if that's a word, but it reminded me of a Vince Guaraldi kind of figure. The original triplet idea returns softer with some harmonic movement and bass harmonics that perk up underneath into a bass solo from Fortea over sustained piano backing from Royo and delicate drums from Derval. Fortea makes another ringing and reaching solo with cool rhythmic ideas along the way. It's very intense. He then lays down a deep bass groove, and Delve gets a snappy drum groove to match it for a solo from Royo. He plays some chiming and running figures in the upper register before coming down in the middle for some more rhythmic descending ideas and then percussive ideas and some more of those zippy runs. They give some space with piano chords and bass ringing out for Delve to do some drum work before returning with the triplet motif from the beginning and end with some soft piano and cosmic bass bowing sounds. And we're going to end up the recording with Himno de Miranda, Hymn for Miranda, a solo piano piece by Royo. It's rubato, but it has some dazzling runs and moments of exuberance, as well as a real sense of playfulness, hinting at different styles of classical, blues, and gospel in little excursions, all wrapped up with a lovely ending. So I thought this is a really fun and energetic recording. It's a debut, all original music, a lot of interesting rhythmic things going on, interesting compositions from the opening Pangea, and a cool Bangkok with Orientalism and blues mixed into it. Some slower, more tender moments with the Riancorrentro. Great piano playing, intense, and also a nice light touch in places from Royo. Forte's bass is prominent and unique in sound and phrasing. And Delval matches the mood from whispery to full assault mode. And so I thought this is another exciting and fabulous piano trio debut recording.
Yeah, I think you liked this a lot more than I did, although I did like it a lot, I want to say. But you talked it up so much through the week. I was like gung-ho to hear it. And I was like, it's good, but I don't know. I was really impressed by the ideas on it. It just seems to have like a lot of ideas like in each track. It was lively and energetic. We get a piano trio, and then we get sounds created by a piano trio. But then they go way beyond the sound we expect when we think of piano trio, right? You hear bowed bass effects, you hear African and Latin percussion effects, straight drums, lush classical type piano lines, and intermingled with the jazzier ones. You get swing, you get something that's more kind of angular and kind of bouncy. It's an album with a lot of variety, I thought, and it crosses genres several times within single tracks, and I really did enjoy that. I think it's something that's going to repay repeated listenings, because I think there's a lot going on. I was kind of a little bit overwhelmed by just what I was hearing. It wasn't what I expected, in other words. So I think part of it I was reading into like, oh, Russ likes it, so it's going to be this, but it's not, so it's I think I gotta just sort of rehear it and kind of get more of the get more absorbed in sort of the unexpected elements in it. There's a lot of unexpected sounds on this album. I think I should give it a listen and check that out. Just be ready for anything.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to unpack here, but overall, it's just got this great bursting energy to it, which I thought
it's good energy.
Me a lot. Yeah, so
never knew what you were going to hear next. Really, it was kind of that was kind of cool on a jazz album,
Yeah, well, usually when you get kind of a debut like this, you're going to have a lot of standards or their favorite tunes, and this just sort of really slams you with all this original, like really complex stuff, and it's well played. And what I like about this, the same thing that initially struck me when we heard Spiral Trio last year, is the real active and equal importance of the bass as a lead instrument, not just a support for the piano. So Forte here is very aggressive, interesting, and has a lot of palette of unique things that he can do. So.
Yeah, and I think that the highlighting of the bass is going to be like a common theme with all three of these jazz albums this week. The bass really is prominent in all three of these.
Yeah. And so the next recording is also a piano-led recording by a pianist, Dan Costa. It's on a Symphonic distribution label. It's called Beams. And I've heard Costa's name, and I haven't really checked out his music too much, but I thought I really should, going on the weight of the guests on this recording. Some really big names here. And so Costa was born in London in 1989 to an Italian and Portuguese family. He studied classical piano in France, and he wrote his first composition at the age of 12. And his Latin roots, along with his passion for jazz, led him to study at the Escola Superior de Música y Artes do Espectáculo in Portugal, where he also got a grant to study Brazilian music in Sao Paulo. And so he's going to show his mastery of those South American Brazilian rhythms on this recording. Here he is with all of his original compositions, arrangements, and the production of this recording. And the guests I alluded to, John Patitucci, the great one on acoustic bass. On drums, we've got Paulinho Vicente. Trumpet, Dave Douglas, a big name in the jazz world. Alto sax, Teco Cardoso. Appearing on electric guitar, Mike Stern, who will dominate the ears on that section with his tone. Soprano sax, the great Dave Liebman on one tune. Percussion, and something very interesting, Hermeto Pascual. And we've also got a vocalist adding some vocalizations on the recording, Anne Boccato. So let's start out with the title track, Beams. And it starts out with some soft, dreamy rubato exchanges of piano chords and figures from Costa and Patitucci's acoustic bass. Costa gets some more momentum going into a flowing tempo with the bass and Vicente's cymbal textures, and then Vicente adds some more clicky groove, and a left-hand piano and bass line leads into a trumpet melody from Dave Douglas, with some improvisations as well. Has a light 8-beat Latin feel to it. Costa comes up after the trumpet melody for a 16-measure solo. It's got smooth runs, rhythmic chords, keeping the uplifting mood of the tune. Patitucci gets an equal measured 16-bar solo himself, and you always know his sound, that very clear attack, ringing tone, and those little bends of pitch he can do.
Yeah, big, thick sound, too.
Yeah, it's great. He makes it rhythmic and interesting with descending lines. Costa continues on with the more free-flowing piano melody we heard at the beginning, and a return of Douglas and the trumpet melody from before into some repeats of the final chords to a soft ending. Track 2, Accalantando. It's a rubato piano intro from Costa with long pauses here. It picks up a soft bossa-like tempo from Vicente's brushes and Patitucci's bass, but takes another pause with rubato piano before the entrance of Teco Cardoso with the melody on alto. It's soft and flowing. Costa doubles with him on the second section of the melody and then has answering left-hand lines into some chords and ringing notes that transition to a piano solo. His phrasing is relaxed and delicate, with Patitucci giving nice push and little fills below him, and Cardoso returns for a solo on alto and keeps it light with nice space between the phrases. Cardoso and Costa join together for a final melody strain, and it rings out softly to the end. Track 3 is En Camino. This is a trio tune, just piano, bass, and drums. Patitucci gets it started out with 16 bars of some intensely rhythmic bass improvisations, with Costa wrapping chords around his phrases, and then gets started on the forward-pushing syncopated melody. Seems to be an AABA construction, but the A section is like 29 bars long, and the B is 16, with syncopated descending ideas and different right-hand figures. At times, it picks up a real samba-type push, but then flows more freely in spots, and has a lot of neat rhythmic piano riffs in it. When Costa starts his solo in the tune, it gets more of a samba press with Patitucci's throbbing bass feel. He keeps his phrases smooth, even when building up rhythmic tension, and has some nice ringing high register runs, ending with pretty cascading figures. Patitucci has a solo working in the upper register, but still sounding incredibly full with exact attacks and busy lines. Then Costa comes back with another run through the A, B, and then A sections with some soft rhythmic chords and a few final ringing notes to end it. Track 4 is called Sparks of Motion. The wide-spreading chorus tone of Mike Stern envelops you from the start with this rubato solo guitar intro here with echoing reverb to his lines. Stern sits out for the melody of the tune, and Costa and the trio take over. It's got a Brazilian-style flowing even beat, AAB form, with more halting piano phrases on the A section and more forward movement in the 9-measure length B section before Stern returns for a solo. Fluid lines with that rich tone, some cool bends, and ends with this really nice soft descending line. The Patitucci follows that with a bass solo. It's a really good one, both rhythmically and melodically, with teasing pauses along the way. And then Stern returns, and this time he takes a run through the melody that we heard on piano the first time, and now on guitar, and he continues with some extended lines over Costa's chords for a soft ending. Track 5 is called Cypress. It's an interesting 4-bar intro with syncopated push and then pauses with added piano. The melody is rhythmic and very syncopated. Piano phrases pushing and then pulling back, kind of like a swaying tree. I don't know if it was like a visualization of the cypress. It seems to be a 32 measured total length. And then we hear part of the beginning again before the rhythmic feel becomes more even. And Costa and Patitucci exchange short solo sections. Costa playing some very fleet and weightless high register figures with a nice touch. There's one more restart to the melody, and then they vamp on the syncopated rhythmic chords for Vicente to do some drum solo filling to the end. Track 6 is called Entao. Here Vicente gets it started with some brushes going on the skins, and Costa adds cute sparse figures that build to the entrance of An Bocato with breezy vocalizations on the melody, along with Costa. They float in and out with rhythmic transitions between them by the trio. There's a lot of variety, and you wonder what is coming next as it stays in tempo, but the rhythmic force varies. Costa works into a piano solo with lots of rhythmic variety, light, delicate phrases, and more percussive chords. Vicente has a lot of light cymbal textures dancing around. Patitucci has a bass solo with a real intense push in the phrases. And then Boccato returns for more vocalization melodies. The tune suddenly stops, and then you're in for a big surprise. At first, I thought someone was drowning in the pool behind the studio.
This was kind of an odd thing, yeah.
It's Hermeto Pascoal, the additional percussionist on the album, and he's adding a new type of vocalization. I don't know, is there a real name for this? I called it glass tumbler gurgling. Now, if you go to Costa's YouTube channel, you can see it in the album trailer video. It's unique for sure. And he gets some real whooping phrases over just light drums from Vicente and ends the tune with some final real bubbling effects.
Yeah, so, I think it reminded me a little bit of like the Beatles song Yellow Submarine with that part. Oh, right, because it's got that kind of bubbling sound in there.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's something he usually does, but it's certainly a
interesting little addition to this album. Yeah.
The next track, 7, is Viewscape. It's got a 4-bar intro with Costa keeping a rhythmic repeating note in the right hand and sort of diving left-hand figures in every other measure. The melody is moving chord phrases with connecting lines in the right hand of the piano. It's an AABA form with some extended spots like an 11-bar B section that builds up tension into the A again, which we only hear one time before going to the B once more. This time Costa extends it with rhythmic chiming notes into a bass solo from Patitucci in a muted upper register, and Costa comes out of that with some ideas of the B harmonies into more rounds of the melody sections, and ends it with some rhythmic vamping with nice subtle interplay from Vicente. Track 8 is Paw Prints, and Boccato's back right from the start to vocalize the flowing melody line in sync with Costa's right hand. There's cool bass and left-hand piano line before the final section of the melody. Pressing tempo dissolves, and there's some pretty piano trickles into a slower vocalization from Boccato with bowed bass from Patitucci. Costa gets a new rhythmic 6/8 feel going with repeated bass notes and chords mixing in right-hand improvisations, and then Patitucci adds longer bass notes and Boccato floats more vocalizations. It gets soft and dreamy to a stop, but Patitucci emerges with some bass fluttery figures that alternate with low ringing notes, and after a kind of pregnant pause, they re-enter with the original melody for a final run to the end. Then we're going to finish it up with a tune called Star Dial, and this one's a duet between Costa and David Liebman on soprano sax. Costa starts it out with an intro of soft ringing repeated chords and sporadic bass notes. It gets some syncopated movements and harmonic changes picking up into Liebman's entrance for the melody that he works together with Costa in the middle register of the sax with very soft articulation. It gets free and lighter with higher piano notes and some high searching lines from Liebman and some more soft and sparse phrases. Costa rings dreamy phrases back into another run of the melody, and there's more soft rhythmic piano for some final sparse lines from Liebman before it ends. So it's a beamy and dreamy sounding recording. There's light and airy melodies, flowing Brazilian rhythms that come easy from the drums because the melody lines have so much motion in the syncopation in Costa's phrasing. The music flows and never seems forced. Costa's piano shows rhythmic drive, but also delicate touch on smooth solo lines. And Patitucci's bass is excellent, as always, with engaging solos. The trio's the basis of the songs here, but we get the guest spots from Douglas on trumpet, Cardoso on sax, and Liebman on soprano, all these horns for some tonal variety, and then Stern's enveloping guitar tone and technique, and the wispy vocals from Boccato. Oh, and don't forget the water gurgling on the one,
water gurgling, too.
It was harder than usual to make myself analyze what I was listening to, even though there are some unusual phrase lengths, and rather than repeating the form, the things get broken up, because I just wanted to sort of sit back and take that kind of sound bath with the breezy mood of the recording. I think it's that kind of album to listen to. You can admire the musicianship in the flowing phrases and solo lines, but it invites a relaxed type of listening just because of these kind of breezy South American rhythms to it.
Yeah, I sort of know what you mean. There's a kind of amorphous quality to the to each individual track that was kind of just hard to say, oh, this is what this is doing. It was sort of odd like that.
Yeah, I felt like I was trying to put something in a box when I'm talking about it. It was a little uncomfortable. It was like it was like shifting out of my kind of coming off the fork every time I stuck it in. Yeah.
Yeah, nevertheless, it was really a really appealing album. I had read somewhere that the title Beams had to do with like types of light. Yeah. And I think that's what he's doing. And I was thinking, you think of light as I've been in this before, light as a particle, light as a wave. I would say that on this album, light is definitely a wave. It's kind of more amorphous. It's not this exact thing occupying space. And I thought because the album comes across as like laid back and mellow. It's I think you said the words I used were tranquil and ideal late night listening. It does tend to be kind of a relaxing album. It's got like kind of a Latin quality to it, but I would hardly call it a Latin jazz album. It's sort of the Latinness is suggested, I feel like, by the tracks. I thought it was abstract, this album. I was having trouble summarizing what I was hearing, like you said. Yeah. It was intriguing, and I found myself wanting to piece together what was happening in each relatively short track. They're all like 4 to 5 minutes long. This especially hit home on the odd vocal break on track 6, where you hear the water sounds, right? Well, I didn't know it was a water sound at the time. I called it a distorted percussive sound, percussive vocal sound, with the drums playing a muted rhythm on the snare. But I rather liked it. I was kind of like looking for it on Amazon. It turns out it's only on streaming, but and I like the cover art too. It was rather colorful with light shining through the trees and these colorful sort of figures on it. So yeah, it's a really interesting listen. I would recommend it. Give it a listen and see what you make of it, because I'm still working on it.
Check it out.
Yeah, I liked it though.
In the final recording, this was something that really intrigued me here, because it's a project on a jazz label that we really like, Posi-Tone Records.
Yeah.
And I really liked the instrumentation lineup, and it turns out it's a really cool recording. And this is by the group of Posi-Tone players going by the name Something Blue. And this is a new recording, Personal Preference. Just came out on January 6th. And the horn lineup intrigued me with 2 saxes and trombone, and a lot of names that we know from the Posi-Tone label. This is a project of the Posi-Tone producer, Mark Free. And this is what he says. With the Something Blue series of releases, my goal is to present a series of focused and concise performances to create maximum enjoyment. For this 2023 release, I specifically focused on assembling a group of talented composers. I selected some familiar collaborators: bassist Boris Kozlov, alto saxophonist Marcus Howell, and drummer Donald Edwards. Also chose some new faces as well: tenor saxophonist Willie Morris, trombonist Alton Senekalar, and pianist Misha Tsiganov. I hope this program of new compositions will encourage a wider audience of listeners to increase their engagement with jazz, so it becomes their personal preference for musical entertainment. So this is Free's idea to get these musicians together, and I think it's a really cool idea. A lot of these names we've heard a lot, especially Boris Kozlov, the busiest bassist that we know of.
On our podcast, anyway.
On our podcast, yeah. Second only to Ron Carter. Actually, we've called him the Russian Ron Carter a few times.
Right, yeah, because he's on every album.
Yeah. And so we've got this group here. I'll go through them again. Marcus Howell on alto saxophone and soprano saxophone on 3 tracks. Willie Morris, tenor sax. Alton Senkalar on trombone. Misha Tsiganov, who we heard a recording from last year on the podcast, a Russian-born pianist, Boris Kozlov on bass, and Donald Edwards on drums. Mark Fries, the producer, and Nick O'Toole is the engineer. And we've got a program of mostly compositions by these musicians, starting off with the real burner that when I heard this, I knew I wanted to hear the rest of the album, because this one really zings. It's called The Path, and it's by Marcus Howell. So we get off to a smoking start on this tune. The horns pick up into a fast tempo, swinging super hard on a great horn arrangement of the minor melody. Howell's alto has a real searing tone. If you can think of, going all the way back to like Cannonball Adderley's kind of tone, when he had that real edge on it, it takes that kind of quality. And Morse's tenor and Senkalar's trombone have really cool moving lines under the lead alto sound. There's a 16-bar melody section that repeats, but the end section is different on the second time. And then there's a 4-bar transition into a different 16-bar segment with the pickup into a smoking alto solo from Howell, swinging hard with cutting-edge tone. He does multiple choruses over the original form, finishing up on the different section where the rhythmic feel changes up in Edwards' drums and Kozlov's bass from the fast walking to pairs of notes. That breaks into a trombone solo from Senkalar. He has cool rhythmic play and nice slide agility with bluesy hints in his phrases, taking it out in the harmonies for a bit over the ending section. Then Tsiganov is up for a busy and bouncy piano solo, and he builds up some good harmonic tension before and working through the contrasting section at the end, and then continuing to finish his thoughts when the horns bring back the melody section for a final exciting run. So we're off to a really intense start. Track 2 is a tune by Willie Morris, the tenor sax player, called Flyover Country. This one's a waltz ballad. Tsiganov provides some pretty ringing chords and a few high notes over interesting light drumming from Edwards in the 8-bar intro. The horns have a warm, soft, flowing melody line, nicely harmonized in the first 16 bars. The next section, also 16 bars, has swelling horn phrases with a joyful trombone outburst along the way. There's an 8-bar transition of bass and left-hand piano figures into another 16-bar melody section with a little more animation and horn line movement. Then Morris is up for a tenor sax solo. He blows out a lot of soft double-time figures that snap nicely with the rhythm, and Edwards providing nice cymbal work behind him. And Tsiganov follows that with a lot of pretty chiming chord ideas. We hear the 8-bar bass transition section again into the more animated melody line to finish it up. And we're going to get a tune by the trombonist Altin Senkalar, Blended, for track 3. This one starts with an agile horn pickup to an exciting Latin beat into a 16-bar syncopated theme with a very thick horn arrangement. They repeat it with the pickup, which you realize then has 2 extra beats, making it a very tricky kind of phrase. There's an 8-bar transition section that switches up to swing, has nice trading between the saxes and trombone, and the last measures are the original pickup phrase with those extra beats. They go through the original 16-bar melody line with a break at the end into a solo from Senkalar. You get some fun, really low blasts at the beginning and end of this trombone solo. Lots of tricky slide work and good rhythmic phrasing. Nice playing as they include the swing sections in the solo patterns. There's a cool 8-bar transition section with Latin ostinato bass patterns and building horn figures into an intense alto solo from Howell. And here they keep it swinging underneath. Howell has a lot of nice melodic ideas and a really cool cry along the way. There's another bass ostinato transition with some drum fills that brings it back to the horn pickup line for a final run through the melody sections to a cool final chord. Now we're going to get a Tsiganov composition, Seeley Street Song. But this one I had to listen to a couple times to figure out what was going on. It's a softer medium tempo tune in a 5/8 meter, at least to begin. Tsiganov plays a pretty 8-measure intro over nice drum ideas from Edwards. The horns have swelling melody lines for the first 8 bars. Then the tune switches to 6/8 for 4 measures with different kinds of horn lines, and then back to a similar swelling horn line in 5/8 meter like we heard in the first section, but this phrase is only 7 measures long. This is quite an unusual structure, switching between phrase length and meters. Well, Tsiganov takes a solo over the exact same pattern they use for the solo as the melody twice. He goes around it. Clear articulation, animated right-hand lines, keeping punchy rhythms in contrast with his left hand. The horns return for the melody for a final run through repeating the final 4 figures a few times, and then extending the 5/4 pattern for a few improvised thoughts from the horns.
Yeah, no, I didn't actually try to count out the beats in this, but it did stand out because of all those odd changes. I could kind of tell. I sensed that there's something odd about it.
Even if you don't try to figure it out, you'll be out of your swaying motion on the sofa or hammock or wherever you are. Track 5 is also a Tsiganov composition, Yasha. A drum pickup into a fast tempo intro with alternating piano chords and bass notes, some drum fills for 16 bars. There's a really swinging 16-bar horn theme over syncopated bass for the first half, and then walking bass that adds more forward motion for the second half of that section. They repeat it and then go into a contrasting 16-bar Latin beat section. They go back to the original section, but it's shorter at only 14 measures, and the piano introduction from the beginning of the tune returns for 12 bars with the 4-bar break at the end. That's the start of the solo for Howl. Another construction to keep your ears on your toes from Tsiganov. Howl swings really hard on this solo, and then Senkalar takes over on the Latin section into a round of swing on the trombone. Morse follows on tenor for a couple rounds on the swing sections, and Tsiganov takes the Latin section into more swinging sections for his own solo. The horns get new composed and arranged lines into 8-bar exchanges of soloing by Edwards, who then gets some more extended time to play. They go around the melody sections once more with a few repeats of the final phrase and some drum fills to finish it off. Track 6, a composition by Willie Morris called Grit. An intro with ringing bass notes from Kozlov and chiming chords from Tsiganov. The horns get started on a fast swinging line, but on the 6th and 7th bar, there's a big change-up, and then suddenly a loping ostinato bass from Kozlov at a new tempo emerges. Only Howell hangs on with a soft alto tone and then continues into a solo over the groove, soloing freely and intensely. Kozlov and Edwards transform the hypnotic groove into a fast double-time swing, and Howell continues on with speedy lines. There's some transitioning horn lines into a return of the loping bass for Morris to start a tenor solo. He works up from repeated ideas to more agitated other thoughts on his lines. Kozlov hints at the encroaching double-time shift that's going to come, and then he gets into it, and Morris matches that with fast snaking lines blowing hard down on the lower register. The rhythm section interaction is very intense underneath here. It ends up with a final horn line into a surprising happy-sounding major chord after all the minor modal mayhem we've been through. It was a very fun vehicle for some intense sax soloing. Track 7 is a Kozlov original, Palanga, and it's got these little apostrophes in it. I don't know what that means. I thought Palanga is like a resort town in Lithuania, I think. I don't know if this is supposed to be that or not.
We'll hear from them and they'll let us know. That often happens.
Yeah.
So,
It starts with 3 long held notes in the horns with busy drum and piano ideas and bowed bass underneath that makes the intro. Then Edwards kind of whips up a beat on the drums into swinging horn melody lines. Howell's soprano stands out here on this track, as well as the low syncopated trombone lines on the long 40 measure length melody. Morris is up first for a tenor solo, and Howell follows on soprano. There's a tricky syncopated horn line transition section with more cool low trombone lines, and then into a trombone solo from Senkalar, and the feel shifts to more Latin with snappy bass figures from Kozlov underneath. There's another short horn transition back into swinging for an energetic solo from Tsiganov, and the horns stay on for backing into a final melody run to end up the tune. Then we've got track 8, another Edwards tune. I don't know how to say this. It's like Nisi.
Yeah.
Spelled like
Nisse.
Nisse. Nisse. Anyway, bass whole notes plot along under a more busy beat from Edwards, and the trombone then joins those bass notes. Suddenly, the saxes come in, and the trombone joins them for a swinging 12-bar melody over fast-walking bass. It ends with Kozlov soloing alone over Edwards' light drumming. Kozlov has all kinds of things going on with fast lines, intense rhythms. The horns join in on soft harmonized backing lines into an alto solo from Howell. He blows relaxed here, connecting lines of more spaced-out phrases. Tsiganov is next, starts out with more disjointed figures and oddly placed notes in the sort of rhythmic space that's there. Then he gets more of a groove in his lines, but breaks it up again. The horns come in for backing into a final run of the 12-bar melody. Track 9, another Cinq-Allard tune, Here to Stay. This one's got a Latin beat 12-bar intro with syncopated bass and piano chords and these 2-bar rising horn phrases. The first 8-bar section of the melody is swing, keeping that rising phrase idea from the intro. Then it goes to 8 measures of Latin and repeats the A-B pattern. The horn arrangement is really good, making the most of the 3 voices of the horns. Cinq-Allard comes out of that with a trombone solo, lots of jolly melodic riffs and fast slide work. He navigates the switch-ups from mostly swing to the Latin beat sections, and Morris follows on a tenor solo. Then there's a new horn solo, like soli melody, just over the drums that works back into another run through the melody. And Tsiganov gets a solo next with some exciting rhythmic and harmonic ideas, and the horns rejoin on the Latin B section of the melody and repeat it into a slowed down ending line with some final sliding from Cinq-Allard. Track 10 is another Tsiganov original, Waltz for Olena. It's a 16-bar intro of pushing and ascending chord patterns, and then 3 softer bars to transition into the melody, taken by Howell on soprano sax here for the first 16 bars. The other horns join in for backing lines and more arranged sections of melody. Howell gets a soprano solo after that, often staying in the warmer lower register and blowing gently. The Cinq-Allard follows with a very fluffy, toned trombone solo. And then Howell blows some more simple melody lines and the horns build up around him as Tsiganov adds some nice trickling piano phrases below. Kozlov has some very snappy bass lines at the ends of phrases underneath in this section. The horns continue to the end with a few final holds for Howell to add some final improvisations over. It's a gentle, flowing waltz tune. Track 11. This is not by one of the players here, but another pianist on Posi-Tone, David Ake, and it's called You May Have Already Won. Sounds like one of those commercials, right? Edwards gets a fun drum beat going into a 14-measure calypso melody from the horns, just over the bass and drums, that has 2 extra beats in the 8th bar. Every time I listened to it, it would throw me off. I had to figure out what it was. It's a weird phrase length with those extra beats. Tsiganov joins in lightly under the happy trombone solo of Cinq-Allard, and it's basically following over rhythm changes. I got rhythm, but with a calypso beat for the harmonic pattern. The rhythm stops for a bit for Morris to get started on a double time solo, and then the band joins him again at the new fast tempo. There's another complete pause, and Howell is up on alto, and he takes it back to the original tempo. And then Tsiganov follows that, and it goes back to the double time feel. And after that, Kozlov follows with a really fun bass solo of speedy and snappy licks. And finally, the horns return with another run through the melody, this time faster than we originally heard it. So kind of a fun mixture of elements here. And we're going to end up with an older song, not by any of these musicians, but by a well-known jazz bassist, Ben Tucker. And what better way to end a recording than with a funky minor blues in the old sort of post-bop or hard bop kind of tradition, Coming Home Baby. There's a 12-bar intro with Kozlov taking the first 4 bars to set the funky mood on bass. Then piano and drums join in, getting the groove going. The horns take the short, sassy phrased melody in unison and then split into harmony on the long notes in the 9th bar. They go around twice for good measure, and Morris is up first on tenor with some Joe Henderson-like sounding licks, cool clipped rhythmic phrases, and double-time lines. Howell's up next with tart bluesy phrases on alto, and Cinq-Allard follows, getting some tricky slide work after some cool bluesy phrases on trombone. Back to Howl for a chorus, another from Cinquelar, and then the two continue on in trade fours, growing around a time with some tricky articulated licks exchanged. Tsiganov gets some solo action too, starting out with relaxed ideas, working up to more speedy and extended lines. And they take it around the melody a couple more times with a final phrase repeats and a slowdown with some final flurries on trombone from Cinquelar. So, 12 tracks. You got an hour's worth of music here from some well-known Posi-Tone players, highlighting their original compositions. Mark Freya has a really good thing going with this concept, I think. They've got a previous recording. I don't know if I mentioned it at the beginning, but a few different players, not all the same. 2019, it was called Maximum Enjoyment, also by Something Blue. So a little interlabel project for Posi-Tone going on here. Well, the tunes are varied, interesting, have some unusual structures and twists to sink your ears into. They're well arranged with these horn lines, making the best of the horn lineup. I especially enjoyed Howell's searing alto tone, taking charge of these melodies, and on the other end, the low bone tone of Cinquelar filling out the sounds there. Most of all, the intense solos are excellent with a nice assortment of approaches and personalities. It was good to hear more from Tsiganov. He's a very unique and exciting pianist, and the always great Kozlov does some great work and locks it in with Edwards nicely. So let's hear more of this kind of project in the future from one of our favorite labels, Posi-Tone.
Yeah, this album came as it was the only upbeat album we heard this week. We were kind of more like sort of down tempo or moody for most of the other albums this week, and this one was just lifting me out of that. It came as a ray of sunshine for me that I really needed after those other 5 albums, which I really enjoyed. But and now in this case, Cinquelar, the trombone player, I enjoyed his playing the most. I actually singled him out, first of all because I guess the saxophones were great on this, and they were a great foil for him. But I really liked his phrasing and shaping of tones. He was very expressive in the way he kind of like played his tones. He kind of molded his kind of tone, and it just kind of drew me in on each note. I felt that he managed to get a lot of expression into his solos, as did the saxes, but they were lighter and a good foil. And they brought their solos to these breezy heights that just made me feel good. Right. The album got a bit wilder in the middle, especially on the track Grit, which really stood out for me.
There's not much of a tune there. It's just a solo vehicle, really, yeah.
And it's pretty wild soloing with some interesting ideas in it, too. I also enjoyed the very last tracks, High Spirits, Coming Home Baby. It just made me feel good. It was a good way to... And this album begins and ends really spectacularly with this really, really upbeat feel. Yeah.
Good
and the interaction between the sax and trombone and Coming Home Baby was fantastic too. So yeah, I think that just this particular album, just because of how different it was from the other ones, really kind of pulled me in. I really needed this week. It just felt great.
Yeah. We almost always enjoy what we hear come out of Posi-Tone, and they put out a lot of records, and so always looking forward to hear what's coming out. I've got some other ones coming out soon on my list, so hopefully by the springtime we'll hear some more of our favorite players and hear some new musicians. And I'm going to keep my eyes open for something from Cinquelar, because as you said, I was pretty excited by his trombone playing here as well. Me too. So I'd like to hear some more of his Latin-type jazz compositions. Those kind of unique.
Yeah, by the way, this one's on a CD, too. I'm happy to see.
Yeah. Posi-Tone are reasonably priced and easy to get. Yeah. So I commend them for that as well.
Also, a nice retro album cover here with the blue tinted saxophone with the hand. Yeah. I thought that was kind of cool. Yeah.
Pretty cool. Although I feel like it might slip through the cracks just because, rather than having anyone's name on it, it's just got this something blue. It's kind of nondescript. If you don't know what it is, you might just pass over it.
Not if we can help it. That's what we're here for.
That's why we're here. Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, there you have it. That's episode 98 as we inch closer to 100. And, next week we've got our themes already set up. We're going to have some cello in the classical programming. Yeah. We're going to have some vibes in the jazz. And we already know for our 100th episode, we're going to go with fanfares of trumpets.
Yeah, lots of trumpets in that one.
So, things are lining up. Looking forward to that. Before we finish everything up here, thanks as always to Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo. And as I mentioned at the beginning, be sure to check out those other music podcasts. The trailers promotion will follow when we sign off here. So do hang on and listen. If they sound interesting, follow those links at the bottom of the podcast. And well, for next week's cello and vibes, if you want to know what those recordings are, shortly after this episode gets published, I'll have the playlist up on Deezer and also a link to it on our Facebook page. So if you want to get started listening and find out what those recordings are, you can do that after you listen to this podcast. Any other final thoughts there, Mike?
I'm just ready for next week, ready to get into the
all right.
Cello and vibes. Vibing with the cello.
Vibing with the cello.
Cello vibes. Maybe we can call it cello vibes.
Yeah, we could do that. That'd be good.
Yeah.
Well, we'll look forward to that, and then some celebrating for our 2-year anniversary 100th episode coming up in a couple weeks. We're going to share our happiness with lots of good new recordings with you all. So please stick around for lots of good things coming up, and we'll see you again next week for episode 99.
Gerald Albright, Rhea Schneider, Charlie Hunter, Duke Robillard, Sean Jones, Walter Beasley, Steve Swallow. Something Came from Baltimore is a jazz, blues, and R&B podcast and radio show, and it's not really about Baltimore. Subscribe to the podcast and listen to your favorite artist or future favorite artist. That's Something Came from Baltimore. And be a part of that Be More music scene. Joe Lovano, Jeff Kaufman, Paula Cole, Danuzo Makatani, Ann Passio, Ches Smith, Thumbscrew, mostly.
Hi, jazz fans. This is the founder and host of Neon Jazz, Joe Domino. It's both a weekly radio show and interviews with musicians from all over the world, like the Netherlands, New York City, and back to Kansas City, the home of Neon Jazz, covering the rich history and modern world of jazz in a fresh way, featuring interviews with the likes of Arturo Sandoval, Sonny Rollins, Maria Schneider, and countless others. Find our weekly show on Mixcloud. Subscribe to the interviews via iTunes and YouTube. We are Neon Jazz.
Same difference. 2 jazz fans, 1 jazz standard. A review of a single jazz standard through music, history, and stories. And this is AJ.
And this is Johnny.
If you are a jazz fan and you like jazz standards, bebop, show tunes, ballads, you name it.
Yeah, we've got them here. We drop a new show on you every other week, and we take a standard and we listen to a few different versions of it.
Same difference.
Come join the fun.
Looking forward to seeing you.